Before choosing a frame for your house, answer the following questions. Do you want to build your house on a slope? Do you want to install 20-foot long windows? What kind of roof will you have, flat or sloped? If you answered yes to even one of these questions, choosing a wooden or metal frame could cost you $50,000 in problems. Now I'll show you how choosing a wooden or metal frame affects your budget and whether or not it justifies your investment. So, a wooden frame costs $75,000. What does this cost include? Of course, it's the materials, $40,000 to $45,000. Labor will cost you $20,000 to $25,000, depending on how you negotiate with your contractor. And there are some minor unforeseen expenses around $5,000. Altogether, that comes to $75,000. If we look at a metal frame, the cost of the metal itself will most likely be about $90,000 for a 2,500 square foot house. And the labor will also be more expensive, about $40,000 to $45,000, because here you'll need assemblers from the commercial sector, since regular residential contractors who build wooden houses won't be able to assemble a metal house. You'll need to hire specialized professionals, and of course, there will be unforeseen expenses. So in total, $150,000 for a metal frame. This is a metal house that I built 2 years ago. The biggest problem was finding specialists who could assemble the metal frame. Yes, we managed to import the materials from abroad and saved money on the metal, but for the construction work we had to hire specialists who work in the commercial sector, and that was very expensive. So, if you've answered the question, I'm building on a slope, then let's break down this situation. Example number 1. A house on a slope, and your client wants to build a house and a carport. Of course, the carport will have to bear a certain load. Supports are installed on which you can build a wooden frame, and a car will be able to drive in there. But most likely, over time, due to soil movement and the car driving in and out, this wooden frame could fall apart. That's why the choice here was obvious. We built a metal frame on piers with a concrete base on a metal sheet. Was it possible to build this carport on a slope out of wood? Yes, it was possible. But what issues would we have faced? For example, the recent flood in Texas showed that all weak wooden structures were simply swept away by the water flow. And the last flood demonstrated that powerful streams of water run down the slope, flooding the area, and wooden foundations might not have held up. The next point is that it's a complex engineering challenge because a car drives onto the carport. It drives in, you drive out, and vibrations occur. Accordingly, over time, the wood would simply become loose and the carport could collapse.
Building a house? Sign up for a consulting meeting.
Here's a second example. If you're building a house in a flood zone, it's extremely important to make the right choice. A recent flood showed in one of my houses that during a flood, the first floor gets flooded. If almost your entire house is in a flood zone, that floor will get flooded. If the house were made of wood, we would have had to completely remove all the drywall. We would have had to remove all the insulation and possibly replace some parts of the wood as well. In our case, we used a metal frame for the house, and when the water just passed through, we simply dried out that area and did nothing else, because metal is designed to handle exposure to water. And during the flood, nothing happened to our house. I made the right choice 2 years ago. Moreover, there's another point. When you insure your house, if your house is in a flood zone and it's made of wood, you'll pay 3 times more for insurance. If the house is made of metal, the insurance company will take that into account and set a lower insurance premium for you. If you've answered the question, I want large windows more than 20 feet long, you'll definitely face the question of what material you should use for the frame. With large windows longer than 20 feet, a standard LVL header won't be able to handle such a span. Most likely it will sag. You'll have to build the house out of steel because you'll need to install a column on the right, a column on the left, and possibly even a column in the center if the length is 30 or 40 feet, and the top header will be an I-beam. If you decide to make large overhangs, for example, above these windows, a so-called cantilever, which will serve as the roof over your terrace, as in our project, then you will definitely face the need to use steel. Is it possible to do this with wood? I think it is possible. Of course, you will save money, but over time, in the central part of the window span, the LVL beam will gradually start to sag. In other words, the house settles and your sliding doors will start to open poorly. I have an example from our own house where we encountered this problem. The engineer designed a wooden frame for the house with a wooden beam on top, the so-called LVL header. We installed everything exactly according to the plans, but after a year, the doors started to open poorly. I thought the problem was with the door systems. But when we looked into it and measured the distance at the corners and in the center, it turned out that the center had sagged a little. It was literally just a few millimeters, but that was enough to hinder the movement of the doors. So what did we do? Here's the solution right away for you. We took out the doors, trimmed the top aluminum a little, and that solved our problem. We didn't change the structure because the house had already settled, so there was no need to change anything. We solved it through the doors. However, if you can't solve it through the doors, you'll have to redo your entire structural part. So in this case, the choice is obvious. For a long window, use a metal frame. If you want a cantilever without supports to hold an overhang, canopy, or terrace, then a metal frame is definitely the way to go. There simply isn't any other option. It may seem more expensive, but on the other hand, if you want it, you have to pay for it. So, our house is 2,500 square feet. If you pay $75,000 for a wooden frame, you won't be able to play around with window sizes. Most likely, these will be standard small windows that you buy or order from a supplier. But if you pay $150,000 for a metal frame, you get room for design. You can have large windows, tall windows, you can add awnings, different overhangs. Metal allows you to play with the design. But if you answered the question, I want a flat roof, the situation changes dramatically. Not all flat roofs can be made from wood and wooden trusses, as it depends on the span and the design. If the span is large and the roof is flat, most likely wooden beams will face limitations. And the beam manufacturer and the wooden beam engineer will tell you that you need to put a support in the center of the room or a support here. With metal, it's much simpler. A metal beam engineer will calculate the beams, and you'll be able to install long beams for a flat roof without a single support, only on the walls. Metal allows you to play with the design. Metal makes it possible to build a flat roof. Of course, there's a difference in price. For a sloped roof, you'll most likely use 2x12 rafters, and that will work well, costing you a relatively small amount, about $15,000 to $20,000 for the house frame. But if you're building a straight metal beam, say 30 feet long, that could cost you tens of thousands of dollars, $30,000, $40,000, and there's also the installation, because a metal beam is much heavier. You'll need to order additional equipment. And the people installing it also need to have a certain level of professional expertise. By now, you've probably already decided it's either going to be a wooden house with a pitched roof or a metal house with a flat roof. But there's a solution I call hybrid, and our team discovered it during the construction of 20 houses, where you can combine metal and wood. Take a look at this huge room, 1,500 square feet without a single column. Look at the high ceilings, 24-foot high ceilings without a single column in the center. It's an illusion. There are columns here, but they're hidden inside the walls. There are huge metal beams here that support the entire structure. In order to build such a large space, 1,500 square feet with such a high ceiling, we had to create a fully metal frame and reinforce the entire house with I-beams, metal I-beams around the perimeter. And we hid the columns inside the walls. Of course, there are a lot of wooden elements here as well to save on costs. That's normal. When you combine materials, you can build part of it out of wood and part of it you can build out of metal. For example, look, this column is hidden inside the wall. Once it's covered with drywall, it won't be visible, but it supports the beam that extends to the right side of the house. In the same way, here we have a column that is also hidden inside the wall, and it supports the beam that extends to the back of the house. The next column supports a crossbeam, which in turn holds the main beam that supports the back of the house. This is how it works throughout the house around the perimeter. If we were to remove the wood now, the entire frame would look like a dinosaur skeleton. After the frame was created from metal by our engineer and welded together by our welders, we assembled the rest of the frame around it out of wood and connected the wood to the metal and the metal to the wood. This gave us a certain cost saving, but it also gave us a particular opportunity. We were able to create such large spaces. We were able to make such big cantilevers without visible columns. But if you can't avoid columns, you can make them a design element. In this case, our columns are design elements. You might ask, why would I put up 3 columns? When there's just one column, it looks like a support. When there are 3 columns, it looks like a design element. So let's get back to the hybrid model. If we were to build this house, 5,000 square feet, entirely out of wood, it would cost us about $100,000. That's for both materials and labor. If we were to build it entirely out of metal, it would cost around $200,000 to $230,000. But with the hybrid model, we paid $150,000 for this frame and are confident that this house will stand strong and last a long time. At the same time, we preserved our idea of creating a large open space with a minimal number of columns. So, how should you choose? If the construction is standard, a sloped roof, standard windows, a flat lot, then definitely go with a wooden frame. You save $75,000. But if you're building on a slope with a flat roof and huge windows over 20 feet, then definitely go with metal or the bonus hybrid we just discussed. It's an obvious choice. If you're building on a slope with a flat roof and windows over 20 feet, you need a metal frame, even if it costs you more. When you're deciding whether to build your house out of wood or metal, make sure to keep these 3 questions in mind. The frame you choose will set the budget for everything else. And if you make the wrong choice, you'll be paying for it for years to come.